Good morning. Is everyone hearing me? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, hearing you.
Yeah. May I, on behalf of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, warmly welcome officials from the Ministry of Finance, Investments Division, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, and the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited. My name is Senator Wade Mark, and I'm the chairman of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. May I say from the outset that this committee, known as the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, has a mandate to consider and report to the House on the following. 1, the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of all enterprises that are owned and or controlled by or on behalf of the state. 2, the Auditor General's report on any such accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements. And 3, whether policy is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. The purpose of this examination is for our committee to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations made in a PAEC's 8th report during the 11th Parliament for the period 2009 to 2015. Our responsibility this morning is to ascertain whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. We are also to determine the challenges being faced and possible solutions to these challenges. And finally, to make further recommendations to ensure that the policy of the NGC is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically. This virtual meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Participants are advised that their microphones should remain muted until recognized by the chair. May I now allow other members of our committee, the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, to introduce themselves.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I so do? My name is Fitzgerald Ethelbert Hines, member.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rushton Parry, Vice Chairman on this committee. Thank you.
Yes. Who else?
Good morning, all. My name is Laura Lizama Leasing. I am a member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Amrita Deonarai, member.
Anyone else? If not, I'll now invite representatives to introduce themselves, beginning with the Ministry of Finance, Investment Division.
Good morning. I am Sharon Mohammed, Director, Social and Economic Transformation Acting from the Ministry of Finance Investment Division. And in the room with myself is Mr. Suresh Dan, Senior Business Analyst. Also, we have another person, Mr. Charan, who will introduce himself.
Thank you.
Good morning, members.
Good morning.
My name is Narayan Charan. I'm the manager of the Debt Management Division, Ministry of Finance.
Thank you. Who is next? Can I invite officials from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to introduce themselves?
Good morning, Chairman and other members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to come here today. I am Penelope Bradshaw-Niles, Permanent Secretary Acting at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. I have 3 other members of my team here who will individually identify themselves.
Thank you.
Good morning. I am Sandra Fraser, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you.
Good morning to all. I am Timmy Bach, the Director of Research and Planning at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Yes.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Sheldon Butcher. I'm the Downstream Petroleum Director here at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. May I now invite officials from the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chair. Long time no see. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Conrad Enel. I am the Director and current Chairman of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited.
Thank you. Who is next?
Good morning, Chair. My name is Dan Martino. I am a Director of the National Gas Company Limited.
Thank you. Who is next?
Mark, I think it might be you.
Not seeing Ken. Okay, so Mark Lukwan, President and Director of NGC.
Is there anyone else?
Good morning. Good morning. Narayan Pariag, Vice President Finance, National Gas Company. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning all. I'm Edmund Sabrayan, Vice President Legal and Corporate Affairs, NGC.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Yes. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. This is Velia Kwanvi, Vice President Commercial at NGC.
Thank you all so very much. May I take this opportunity to invite the person who is leading the Ministry of Finance team to make a few brief opening remarks at this time. Mr. Sharon Mohammed.
Yes. Good morning again, Chair and committee.
Yes, continue.
And members. Yes. Well, we just overview of what the investment division does. We are responsible for the oversight and governance of the state enterprise sector, and we do this through the implementation of the manual, the State Enterprise Performance Monitoring Manual, And so that's
okay. Thank you.
And we hope to have a very positive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now invite the President, the Permanent Secretary rather, Acting Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, to make a brief statement.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So the role of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries is basically in three areas. One is that of the line ministry, with responsibility for formulation and direction of policy for the company, as well as in its role as governance, in terms of governance of the energy sector, where we deal with the gas production and utilization, calculation of national energy balance, and also in the role as regulator, where the ministry is involved in terms of facilities, inspections, and calibrations, as well as ensuring that the annual administrative reports are done and submitted to Parliament. So therefore, during the period that we are examining from 2015 to 2018, what we saw was the general impact of the downturn in terms of the prices impacting on the operations of the company. The company did, however, remain profitable, but during that period, it meant recalibration in terms of looking at the governance of the national natural gas sector and how the company was to be positioned in terms of moving forward with the downstream in terms of contracts. So that's my opening statement in terms of the period that we are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. And may I ask the President of the NGC, Mr. Mark Lukwan, to make a brief opening statement at this time?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Good morning again. 2015 to 2018 was and still is a very challenging period because of declining volumes in particular at that time, where supply was extremely challenged. And at the same time, there was also a drastic change in the petrochemical pricing. You would have noted that, prices could have been as high as over $500 back in 2013-14, and it dropped below $200 a ton some years later. So there was significant changes in volume, changes in pricing. There was a lot of activity that needed to be done with respect to securing gas supply going forward in time. So that was a major activity during the period, as well as trying to build the institution with stronger processes, policies, framework, structures, so that the service could be delivered even better, despite the challenges that was experienced.
Thank you very much. May I begin this examination exercise by raising a few matters and asking a few questions before inviting my other colleagues to join in seeking clarifications from the
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Hines?
Please kindly permit me. This very democratic exercise that we are now embarked upon is, as you correctly indicated earlier, published on our parliamentary YouTube channel, on Parliament channel, on radio, and so on. And as I say, in this democratic process, the members of the public are with us. I would like, before we proceed, to have someone, Mr. Lokwan, or someone in NGC, tell the layman in this country, what is NGC? What is its role? Where does it fit in the context of the energy industry? And how does it affect the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Because, Mr. Chairman, up to yesterday, I was speaking to a citizen of this country and mentioned NGC. That citizen, not unlearned, with academic qualification, degree level, was unable to tell me what is NGC's role. All she knew is that it had something to do with gas. So I would be very happy if we would begin with that platform, with that bedrock of an understanding of what this is all about. Where does it fit in the industry? What is its role? So that the public will properly understand our interrogation today. If you would be kind enough.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Hines. Mr. Lukwan, you have heard the submission made by my colleague. Would you be kind enough to give us a very tight synopsis of the role of this very important state entity and how it fits into the overall economic development of Trinidad and Tobago? Mr. Lukwan?
Yes, thank you for that. If one would look at the economy today and some years back, you would see that Trinidad and Tobago, if you were to look at oil production versus gas and the contribution to the economy, you would see that the Trinidad is very much a gas-based economy. And you would have seen that that would have started off many years ago with NGC being born in 1975, more or less to manage those gas resources for the country. Back in those days, it was Associated Gas. It was managing the gas to build an industry and derive some value-added products for the country. Our largest customers, really, who we serve, the big one is, of course, electricity. So all of the electricity in Trinidad and Tobago is mainly by gas, natural gas, and NGC is the supplier of gas. After getting supplied with gas from the upstreamers from this country, we supplied TN Tech. And TN Tech is the one that is distributing power to the country. That's one key role of NGC. Another big role of NGC is how do you take this gas and commercialize it from like a merchant and buy and sell gas really to the downstream sector. So in Point Lisas, you will see a lot of plants that are producing ammonia and methanol, direct reduced iron and various products that have built up over a number of decades. And that is really another key role where we aggregate gas for the country and we make sure we supply the needs for the petrochemical plants. That's another role. The other role is really the light manufacturers, or what we call the light industry, where we have over 100 customers. They employ quite a number of people, and from breweries to cement to various industries. So the gas company actually has an infrastructure that is over 1,000 kilometers all over the island of Trinidad and Tobago and is supplying the industry all across the country. And the other big part is really there's another chain. There's the LNG trains in Point Fortin, where we are shareholder in Trains 1 and Trains 4. So we are also in the liquid natural gas exports. And then there's a number of subsidiaries in NGC, from compressed natural gas or CNG company to the National Energy, which is port and infrastructure, with all the ports in Brighton and Point Lisas and Galeota and so on. And then there's also the Phoenix Park gas processing entity, which is taking out liquids from the gas to avoid it contaminating the Point Lisas plants and making a business out of that in the natural gasoline and LPG chain. That's the role that NGC plays broadly in the whole economy and contributes significantly to the country.
Yeah, well, thank you so very much. And as we proceed, I'm sure that members of the public who are listening and following this very important examination of the financial audited accounts of the National Gas Company will get some more information as we proceed as to the importance of this very critical state enterprise to our overall national well-being. Mr. Lukwan, let me address you first as the president. May I respectfully submit to you that your letter dated February 18th, 2021 was considered by the committee this morning. But in the absence of the data that this committee requested on the 4th of February 2021, we are not in a position to really properly respond to your situation at this time, meaning that we would have liked the company to provide this body with the necessary data on what is called the executive management remuneration package, which we have requested since the 4th of February. And to date, Mr. Mark Lukwan, this committee has not been provided with any data whatsoever on the remuneration packages of the Executive Management Committee. So may I, on behalf of our committee, direct this company through you to provide in writing the entire executive management package to this committee. And if you can do that within the next 48 hours, then this committee, upon receiving that data, will be in a position to make an informed decision. I do not want this committee to engage in wastage of time on matters that are very crucial, but without any data. So this is my very early submission to the NGC officials. Please provide this committee in writing a detailed breakdown of the remuneration packages of the entire executive management team, and please do it within 48 hours, because we have written to this company since the 4th of February asking for that information, which is consistent with our examination of staff costs. There's an item called staff costs, which include wages and salaries, and it constitutes a very important component of this company's operations. So we are carrying out our mandate, and we appeal to you to simply conform to our requests before we can reply to your requests. That's the first point I would like to make on behalf of this committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Hines.
May you permit me, simply in furtherance of what you have just expressed, I would like to record, along with you, this committee's recognition that the NGC did not, and the text of their letter explains actually why the information of which you just spoke has not yet been forthcoming. So I merely wanted to join you, Mr. Chairman, in recording that their failure to produce this information was not on account of negligence or disregard or disrespect in any way, but they had what they considered to be, and what you and I may very well consider to be, a very legitimate concern. And on that basis, they have not yet made it forthcoming. Now that they are getting a reaction from us, I think we should signal to them through you that when we get that information, we will then be able to decide on the most responsible way to handle this, and that would suggest that this committee understands the reason why the information is not yet forthcoming. I merely wanted to join you to say that.
I support what you are saying, and I would like the NGC to be so guided. Make the information available in short order and let this committee examine the information against the background that you have identified so eloquently, Mr. Hines, and that has been articulated by Minister Hines. We would like to have the information. Only when we have that information consistent with the challenges that you have identified, would we be able in a responsible and respectful way navigate thereafter. So we await your response. Mr. Mark Liquan, would you like to respond to the committee's request?
I would just say that we take note of the guidance here so far from the committee, and we did try to explain some rationale. We're now hearing the response from you, and we will be guided accordingly by yourself.
All right, thank you so very much, Mr. Liquan. The other area I'd like to deal with, this is directed at the Ministry of Finance, Investment Division. Mrs. Mohammed, I would like you to note that based on written submissions by the NGC, that company stated to this committee, the PAEC, that Petrotrin had an outstanding debt in the sum of $284 million at the time of its closure, owed to NGC. It was further stated that there are no commitments from Petrotrin for the repayment of receivables owed despite follow-up, with Petrotrin being restructured into 3 new companies, in which one is Heritage Petroleum Limited, which took control of Petrotrin's debt portfolio. Can you inform and advise this committee on the following? What is the status of the Petrotrin indebtedness to the National Gas Company Group? And secondly, what measures are being taken to address the payment of these outstanding funds to the National Gas Company in a timely manner? Madam Mohammed from the Ministry of Finance Investment Division, can you respond?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. At this time, we don't have the information available, but we would like to be able to provide it in writing to the committee, if it's possible.
Yes, we would like, yes. Can you tell this committee when you will be able to do it? Make that information available in writing? Is it within the next 48 hours or you need more time?
I will need more time.
Could you advise this committee?
Within 1 week?
Within 1 week. Thank you so very much.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Hines?
Again, please be kind enough. I crave your indulgence. Just for the record, the restructured entities are now 4 in number and not 3. We still have the Petrotrin, the name now escapes me, but the holding company, which holds its assets and is responsible for its liabilities.
Trinidad
so those liabilities,
Holdings Company Limited, Mr. Hines?
They did not evaporate or disappear into thin air. That holding company now has responsibility for the liabilities of the former entity going forward. So just for the record, the debt did not become obliterated, but it is now the liability of the Petrotrin Holdings entity. And therefore, it supports, in a way, what you have asked. But now we have to get the answer from NGC, who will now tell us how this matter will be ultimately resolved. But there's an old saying, you know, massa bull, massa cow. You know how the thing works. But I'm sure they'll get the thing sorted out on the books.
Thank you very much.
I thank you very warmly.
Hines.
Thank you for
I I continue with the Ministry of Finance. I would like to ask Mrs. Mohammed, given the fact that you have that is your section or division, to oversee the operations of this very important state entity. What are some of the working capital challenges that the National Gas Company has experienced, specifically those that deal with cash flow and cash management? And first of all, I think I'll direct this at Mr. Lee Kwan. What are some of the working capital challenges that the National Gas Company has experienced, specifically those that deal with cash flow and cash management? And how have these challenges affected the NGC's ability to expand and diversify? And finally, what is being done to address the working capital challenges? Mr. Lee Kwan, Lo Kwan, rather?
Yeah, I would give a high-level summary as to what has caused some of the issues, and certainly I would ask my VP Finance to jump in with specific figures if that is required. But as you would be aware, there would have been gas contract renewals from the beginning of from back in 2017 to become effective the beginning of 2019. That therefore meant that the margins on NGC would have been very different before and after 2019, because you may be aware that the margin changes as a result of higher prices from upstream, which had to be incurred for NGC to acquire gas, therefore had to continue to supply the electricity sector, which I spoke about in the beginning. And therefore, part of the challenges in the working capital management is how do you continue a business that really has a burden, so where your largest customer, which is really TNTech in this case, is you have two elements. You have a subsidy where you're buying gas and you're supposedly selling gas at a different price than what you sell, a lower price to the entity. And then you have the complications of non-payment. And we have entered into some solutions for some of these issues, and some of which are still being discussed. Some of these solutions include loans that involve the government, TNTech, and NGC. And maybe I should stop there in terms of saying that is part of the biggest issues that is facing NGC during that period. And of course, you would have also had challenges now, but I think we're talking the period 2016 to 18. Is that correct?
Yes, but you can always anticipate the future as well.
All right. So on top of that, as you know, the petchem prices would have been continued to be dropping. And just as an example, between 2018 and 19, you would have seen methanol prices drop 30%. Between 19 and 20, you would have seen it drop another 20%. If you take ammonia, you would have seen ammonia prices drop 20%, just over 20%. And if you went into 2020, you would have seen it drop another 10%. Right now, in the last quarter of 2020, you've seen some turnarounds in the ammonia and methanol prices. The LNG sector has also been challenged because you would have seen a lot of oversupply in LNG in the global market because of new plants coming on stream in Australia and many other places. So therefore, we are still, prior to COVID, experiencing challenges with the petchem prices, as well as we were in that period. Of course, I just said it was turning around in the last quarter. But on the LNG side, it still is a fundamental issue of oversupply, but that is dependent on how fast the energy demand continues to grow in China and India and Asia in particular. So that will be impacted by that. And of course, the COVID issues that you see now in 2020, that is also exacerbating issues around the demand for some of these products that we make in Trinidad, ammonia and methanol. So if our largest customer, if we exclude TNTech for the time being, is ammonia and methanol, and that is our key customers, and they are also experiencing challenges both in petchem pricing before the turnaround in the last quarter of last year, and they're also seeing it with demand shut off as a result of COVID. Then you can imagine that there are challenges in the sector because of those issues. And maybe I just ask Naranjit, who's our VP Finance, just to kind of expand on the working capital issues.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Just to further elaborate on the current cash position with the company and how we have been managing over the last couple of years, given the challenges that Mr. Lucan has just spoken about. Yes, the business has been fundamentally impacted by the decline in commodity prices, which had a knock-on effect on the margins of the business and therefore its ability to pay its operating and capital expenses. Over the last 4 to 5 years, the situation has been further exacerbated, by the non-payment, which Chairman, you just spoke about the non-payment from Petrotrin, but we also have non-payment, from the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, which has created a significant drain on our limited cash flows. In fact, as of this time, at the end of 2020, if I were to just quote numbers, the National Gas Company is indebted to the tune of, $5.6 billion from the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, of which, $3.7 billion represents a loan and $1.9 billion represents receivables for the years 2019, 2020. Having said so, Mr. Chairman, committee members, we have done a great job in terms of managing our cash balances. If you look at our cash position at the 2015, it would have been around $6.8 billion cash and short-term investments. And if we look at our cash position at the end of 2019, it would have been roughly $6.5 billion. So we've done a pretty good job in terms of, managing our cash flow, to allow us to sustain operation during the last 5 years. And we've done that by managing, as cash, fell from the cash generation fell from the corporations. We've taken proactive steps to deal with, managing cost, managing our investments in capital projects. And therefore, the growth of the business obviously would be, stymied if you don't have cash flows to fund growth. And beyond that as well, we have also, when you look at our dividend distributions over the last, 2 to 3 years, you will see a significant curtailment in the dividend distributions to our shareholders. So our shareholder, is obviously adversely impacted by, the cash flow situation and not getting the revenues from the National Gas Company to support the government's, fiscal agenda. What are we doing right now? Going forward into 2021, clearly, with further, depression of commodity prices, it is impacting the business, and clearly the issue around, non-payment from our largest customer is something that, we are working actively with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy to have addressed. It's a leakage, a cash leakage that, the business can't sustain. Having said so, what we also plan to do in 2021 is that, we will be going to the market to raise some financing to address some of our, capital needs. So I think I will close there.
May I ask Mr. Pariag, as you're on the floor, given the fact that for the first time in its existence, this very important state enterprise recorded for the first half of 2020 a loss of $316 million. Can you tell this committee, one, what is the current total outstanding debt of this company? And in the current financial crunch, how has this company been addressing the repayment of the said debt that you will tell us the total of at this time? What is the current total debt?
So, Mr. Chairman, the current debt outstanding, by the National Gas Company is $2.3 billion at the end of December 2020. The biggest element inside here is a debt for $2.2 billion that matures in 2036. That's a $400 billion bond that was issued in the international capital market way back in 2005 to finance, pipeline infrastructure and investments in Atlantic 3 and 4. In terms of dealing with that liability that matures in 2036, well, what we have in place is a financial instrument that we have in place that will, provide cash flows to redeem $200 million US of that amount outstanding, or approximately $1.4 billion of the $2.2 billion. So we have in place a financial instrument to address more than 50% of that debt outstanding that will mature in 2036.
All right. Before I ask my other colleagues, Mr. Parry, to probably enter, may I ask as well, Mr. Lukwan indicated a short while ago that apart from lower commodity prices for ammonia, methanol as examples, and the outstanding loan and debt owed to it by TNTech, which you have now given a figure of close to, is it $5.6 billion, including, you said, a loan of $3.7 billion and some receivables, just about $1.9 billion. Mr. Lukwan, could you tell this committee to what extent that the higher prices for natural gas being charged to NGC by upstreamers have contributed to this financial crisis that is now facing this very once profitable company? Can you tell this committee what role, if any, has this development played in the balance sheets and profit and loss statements facing the National Gas Company? Mr. Lukwan?
Yes, Chair. Thank you for that question. I would like to at least place the loss in some context that is not only local in nature. Because if we look at the BP, Shell, Exxon type of companies that are worldwide, you would have seen Exxon declaring a loss of $22.4 billion. 2020, you would have seen BP losing shareholder value of $20.3 billion. You would have seen Shell negative $21.7 billion, all in 2020. So there is a global context that is happening here as a result not only of falling petchem prices, but there's also all the issues associated with COVID coming along. And as I mentioned before, prior to COVID, you already had a drop in petchem prices, and you already had an oversupply in LNG. What COVID did is actually shut off industrial demand significantly as a result of planes not flying and the economy is changing and so on. So what you had was a complete slowdown in economies, and you had a limited demand for some of the products that you would normally have. What is happening here in the change in the market is you're going from a production-driven world where you produce something and it just goes into the market, and you're now in a clearly a market-driven environment where the most competitive plants can survive. So when this happened, you didn't see only Trinidad being affected. So you saw, of course, plants like the Titan plant in Methanex that of course took decisions around idling the plant. It is still down. But then you also saw plants across the world. You saw plants in Netherlands, you saw plants in China, Russia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Chile, and you saw a lot of plants across the globe also making decisions to either idle their capacity for now, or to extend their turnarounds to a longer period, take outages and so on. And that is what has been happening until the market is recovering and vaccinations and all of these things come on board. So with respect to your question on higher prices for the acquisition costs, yes, of course, that would have affected the price that we would have paid before. But of course, if you have distortions like we do in Trinidad, where if you're buying even at a higher price, what it means is you are subsidizing even more the electricity sector, and you're also not being paid by the electricity company. So it did exacerbate it from that point of view, and of course it did change the competitiveness of the sector, because if we look at some of the downstream sector, in addition to the higher cost of gas, which is being experienced, as we know, there's also changes that are going on in the downstream sector as a result of the shale gas phenomena that has happened in the U.S. and particularly during the period we are talking about, where the U.S. became a big shale gas producer. You actually got the effects of new plants being built in ammonia and methanol in the U.S. because of the lower gas prices there. And therefore, what happened is the products from Trinidad also needed to go further away because the U.S. was basically self-sufficient in some of those products. That resulted in higher freight and going further away with your product from Trinidad. So from a sector point of view, it is challenging at this point in time because of those issues. But at the end of the day, if the economies recover, which they likely will once the vaccinations and the lockdowns and all these various things we're coming out of that, then you will see some recovery in the markets. And so where we are today, I think, is a snapshot in some of the difficult part in this journey, and is not only confined to the local landscape, I may add.
May I also invite Mr. Lupan to remember that one of our responsibilities as a committee is to help the National Gas Company to find solutions to overcome its challenges. So I'd like you to take that on board so that you can put in writing for the committee's consideration areas of your operations that you consider to be quite important for Parliament intervention via the appropriate recommendations. So kindly take up the offer, put in writing your thoughts as it relates to how this committee can be of assistance to you. Let me just raise my final question on another matter before I ask Mr. Paré to join us. The NGC established what is called the Energy Marketing and Trading Division for the marketing and sale of equity and third-party energy commodity-related products, including LNG, crude oil, and methanol. Between 2016 and 2020, NGC 100% owned subsidiary companies marketed LNG, equity and third-party cargoes, and crude oil equity to various global destinations. I would like on behalf of the committee to get clarification on the following. One, which global destinations did NGC 100% owned subsidiary companies market LNG and crude oils between 2016 and 2020? That's the first question. The second question, were these marketed goods sold at market price? And finally, did the NGC record any situations where its products were resold to markets it has not penetrated as yet, or destinations it is barred from doing business directly with? And depending on your response to that question, if it is yes, what is being done to capitalize on the untapped markets it is permitted to trade with? Mr. Lukwan or Mr. NL, I would like some responses to that question, and you may also commit your responses to writing. Mr. Lukwan?
Mark?
Just coming off mute. I think it's important to recognize that as a business for NGC, we cannot depend, as we have just discussed, on just buying and selling gas as we used to do in the domestic sector. So what you see NGC is trying to do is become an integrated energy player across an energy value chain. And that means that you can't just buy and sell gas for ammonia and methanol, where we see, and we have talked about margins obviously being impacted. But you also have to think about building our capability in the products that we have, such as the shareholdings that we have in LNG, with the methanol plants as well. We are also in our methanol trading, and we do get oil from being as a joint venture partner in some of the upstream blocks. So we have been building that capability over the years, and I think it is important to position NGC in the gas value chain so that you can maximize value across the chain. Now, the things that would affect some of these issues is not only building capability in the energy marketing and trading group, but it is also positioning yourself in the Atlantic trains. And you would have seen in public that while there are 4 trains, there's discussions around unitization, which really means that you're positioning yourself with a much simpler, unified sort of box, one train equivalent, where you can operationally obtain world-class operations and maintenance, and where commercially you can have greater value in that whole chain. So part of the reasons for building up some of the expertise in the energy marketing and trading would be for that reason, where we're trying to get more value. As far as the markets, you would see that, of course, in the world of energy, that Asia is certainly becoming will become and has become a major part to play because of rising population, changing middle class demographics, and of course the demand for energy is growing in both China and India. And therefore, if you look forward in time, that continues to be some of the destinations that we would have targeted. So you may have seen in the past that we would have signed MOUs with China and also targeted some trading there. We would have entered into government arrangements where we could capitalize on some of the markets that we could enter into, such as Egypt, which was exporting at requiring energy at the time. And then there's also the methanol that is now building out. So yeah, and then there's Latin America as well. So I would ask maybe our VP Commercial to kind of talk us through some of the global destinations and why we have chosen some of those things. But I've given you a kind of high-level picture as to why we need to do these kinds of changes for the business.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As our president alluded to, the NGC equity sales that we currently have, we sell on what we call a FOB, freight on board basis. And these cargoes are sold on a spot pricing basis, meaning that we tender out the cargoes to the highest bidder in most instances. And some of the locations that we've sold to, again, because it's a FOB sales and the highest bidder bids for the cargoes, we have international destinations. So as Mark says, we've marketed cargoes to Chile, in the US to Boston, we've gone to Israel, we've marketed to China. So it's really global. Most global destinations that the winning bidder took the cargo to, that these cargoes have been sold. So it's really been on a global basis that we've sold our cargoes to. So that answers, I think, your second question, if the cargoes are sold at market prices. So yes, we bid for the cargoes, and the winning bidder then takes the cargoes and we get whatever is the prevailing market price at the time for our cargoes. The same thing is done for our crude cargoes. The volumes of crude cargoes that we have are not as extensive as our LNG cargoes, but we do have crude cargoes from the Angostura block, from Block 2C, our equity interest in Block 2C, and these cargoes are also marketed on an international basis. Some of the locations are the US, primarily so far to the US refineries that we've sold those cargoes to.
May I invite Mr. Parry at this time to join this conversation? Mr. Parry?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning to all our guests here today. I have a couple of questions. I have 3 questions that I want to start off with. And the first one is for Ms. Mohammed at the Ministry of Finance. And it is just a follow-up from what Minister Hines had said in terms of Trinidad Petroleum Holdings having both the asset and liability of the Petrotrin accounts. And while I know Ms. Mohammed has identified that she would provide a status on that debt that is owed by Petrotrin to NGC, what I would like, Ms. Mohammed, is if you can specify in your response 2 things. One, if this specific debt portfolio that is owed to NGC is on the list of accounts under Trinidad Petroleum Holdings to be settled via heritage payments. Now, the reason why I'm asking that, the minister advised the Parliament just recently that Heritage is functioning so well as a profitable entity, and that they are taking up a very good portion of the debt that is owed by Petrotrin. All I want to ask in your submission within a week time is to confirm that this particular piece of debt that is owed to NGC is being handled by the Petroleum Holdings, and that one of the 4 entities or the 3 entities that now make up that Petrotrin division, that they will be taking care of that debt in the not too distant future. So that is the first thing for Ms. Mohammed in the Ministry of Finance. I have a couple sub-questions to Mr. Lukwan. Mr. Lukwan, in your response to the chairman, you did mention that in 2017 that NGC was taken up with a lot of gas contract renewals. For my own understanding, what is the lifespan of one of these contracts that would have been renewed in 2017? What is the average age of one of those contracts?
You wish for me to answer now, or you want to go through your questions and I'll answer everything? Because you had two questions for me.
Yeah, it's on a different topic. So this one would close this one off.
Well, certainly for the before and after scenario, you would have had gas contracts that were, in the original life of it, you would have had gas contracts in the order of 20 years, right? Now with the shallow fields getting smaller and the size of fields getting smaller and so on, there's a lot more challenges from the upstream to provide gas for 20-year contracts. So those days are gone. I think you're getting into more of a 5-year type period scenario at this moment.
Those that would have been renewed. Those would have been renewed in 2017, as you advised. What would have been the average age of one of those contracts in terms of the renewal in 2017?
But the average age, as I said, would be in the order of about 5 years, So it would be in that range.
Is it normal practice to engage the renewal of these contracts within 1 year of an expiration date, within 2 years of an expiration date, or do you wait for 6 months of an expiration date to engage the owners of those contracts into a renewal? What's the common practice in the industry, or that which is done by NGC?
Well, it's several years before, because if you take that when a contract is expiring, you're normally we are doing upstream contracts for the purpose of securing gas for downstream contracts. And therefore, if you're going to have a couple of years of negotiations with the downstream contracts, and it takes depending on the complexity of the changes that you are making. If it's a simple, like for like, it's not an issue, but there are several issues that have happened certainly in the 2017 and renewals in those periods, because the contracts you were going from, one, they were shorter. Second, the type of contract clauses between upstream and downstream were not always matched, and therefore you had to change the risk of the contracts that you were entering into so that you have a better match and you're not left holding the ball in between, which is what has happened in some of the obligations that NGC was carrying, right? So if you're changing the contracts, then you should allow for a long time, right? In the case of the BP contract, for instance, which ended in 2018, there was a specific clause that said, you had to renew between the January 2014 to January 2016 period ahead of the 2018 contract, because they are making investments. They are making investments that cost billions of dollars and making decisions, and all of those has its own processes. So if you're going to have the upstreamers commit to those kinds of investments, then you really need to take these discussions as early as you can, right? And it depends on whether you have the gas already or you don't. In other words, if you're still in exploration and development, then that also is deciding, how risky it is for the upstreamers and so on. But the answer to your question is not months, it's not 1 year, and it's not 2 years. It's normally quite as long as you can before.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Before Mr. Parry continues, I must admit, no criticism of Mr. Lokan really, but I must admit, as a member of Parliament, representing the type of, the broad cross-section of the society as I do, the more Mr. Lokan speaks, the more I become concerned about them. I've heard him use the term shale. I've heard him use the term upstream, downstream in relation to Mr. Parry's questions, value chain. and these things, I am particularly concerned. I know he's accustomed to speaking with highfalutin persons like your good self, Mr. Chairman, in air-conditioned boardrooms. But I would like to ask us to speak in a language that the ordinary listener on the radio, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, would understand. I mean, I'm hearing upstreamers and downstreamers and shale and value chain. Please, I would really want them to understand. So, Mr. Lokwan, please bear with us. Part of the reason why so much misinformation traverses Trinidad and Tobago is because the ordinary man, people do not always understand the facts and the truth. So please, could you all proceed with those citizens in mind, those outside the air-conditioned boardrooms?
Thank you for that, Member Hines. I think that's a very, very important question. So I will certainly try to break it down, because it is a chain that we're trying to manage. NGC sits across in an entire chain. And we're trying to serve our customers, right? So our customers need gas, and if you look at our largest customers, the main bulk of our customers, electricity, which is the TNTech issue that we just talked about, and the other customers would be the many petrochemical plants that are taking gas as a raw material, and they're converting it to mainly methanol and ammonia and some of those higher value products that are used in other parts or as raw materials for other products, or they're used as industry materials that you need to make plastics, fibers, resins, automotive, and as the world develops in those products, obviously there's a demand for those products. And of course, if there's a demand for those products, there's a demand for gas that is also required. Unfortunately, you're managing this chain in a contractual framework. In other words, we will normally contract gas for the downstream sector for a fixed period of time, a certain amount of volume, and this is terms and conditions that you supply the downstream for, and you try to find solutions despite the challenges. You try to find the solutions, but as you're trying to contract gas for the downstream, you also have to secure your raw material, because you remember NGC is aggregating all the gas supply from and when I say upstream here, I mean the BPs, the Shells, the EOG, the BHP companies who are taking their rigs and platforms, making decisions on investments to say, let me get gas out of the ground in Trinidad and produce it and commercialize it and sell it to NGC, right?
The lady just texted me to tell me she now understands.
That is very good. I'm succeeding at that. So basically, in that framework where we are trying to keep our customers, contractually satisfied, there is certainly time frames that are required years in advance, as early as you can, to make sure that you can get those resources out of the ground, commercialized by the upstream, sold to NGC, and NGC aggregating and managing the supply to those customers. Because every time there's a disturbance in the upstream, one supplier goes down and so on, you have those kinds of imbalances. There's one guy in the middle who is adding value for everybody, and that's NGC. That's NGC actually stabilizing the supply and actually making sure that the downstream customers are not seeing the full effects of one upstream supplier coming out of service, right? What we do, therefore, is we try to balance that as best as we can. We don't always succeed, but most of the times we would actually, let's assume you get all your contracts in place. There's a whole operations now that is required to make sure that you get gas safely from one point of Trinidad to the next part of Trinidad, and making sure it comes from the east and the north, and it reaches our customers in Point Lisas in a safe, reliable manner that is also cost effective and so on. So that is, I hope that explains it in a little better
well,
detail.
thank you very much, Mr. Lucan. I think, Mr. Parra, if you have no further questions.
I have a follow-up. Mr. Lucan, in looking at the accounts and some of the comments made earlier by your team, I get the impression again that NGC is really not only a seller of gas, but you have investments in local projects with our upstreamers as well. You have investments there. And then I understand that you may now have investments in international business as well, because NGC wants to be a more global provider of energy and energy service. Now, I understand that your investments in our local upstream and ones internationally, you may have little control in terms of the driving profitability on those entities, because you are really a price taker there. The part with your pipeline operations is why I see you have the biggest component of control in terms of how do I drive profitability by managing my costs, because you are directly in charge of your pipeline operations. My question is, taking note of the considerable commodity pricing issues as a price taker, the challenges with local consumption, with the shutting down or resting of facilities in the Point Lisas industrial and so on, what exactly has NGC done to try and minimize, and as I saw the chairman raise the issue of the $316 million loss for the first half of 2020. Can you advise this committee what specifically has the NGC done to try and rationalize and make that loss less? Because I'm sure if you didn't do something over the last 1 or 2 years, that loss may have been closer to $1 billion. But what specifically have you done? And is there any new initiatives that NGC has taken in terms of the expectation of world prices and so on over the next year or two?
Well, I could answer that in a very long way, but I would try to at least break it down again. In other words, if you look at the value that the specific things that we're doing that will add value for the future is securing gas supply. So one of the things that you will see us doing all the time is making sure all our upstream contracts, downstream contracts are always in a pipeline, right? So because we've done all the upstream contracts, as you know, between 2017 and 2019, we're still in some of the downstream discussions. That's one part of the value that is a big part of the commercial operation, right? You would see that there's a longer term initiative with the Ministry of Energy, led by the Ministry of Energy, that involves all the stakeholders in the chain, and that is what we call the gas value chain analysis, where everybody contributes their information. And a third party called Gas Strategies looks at the chain, because the chain has changed between 20 years ago and now, as I tried to explain before. So there are things like that going on. If you look at the projects where we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in projects, you would have seen back in, say, 2016, the amount of projects that would have been done on time, on costs, right, would have been fairly low. And I don't want to call those numbers, but if you look at it now, fast forward to now, you would see that 85% of the projects are on schedule, right? And 90% on cost, right? Of course, in 2020, we would have had to re-baseline some of these projects due to COVID. The other thing that might have happened is that we have become quite technological in the way in which how we are doing our business. So it happens a lot quicker. If you take an example of supply chain management, where you're spending money on procurement, you would see that we would have centralized procurement in one area, and we would have been using e-auctions to manage our procurements, which is a lot faster, a lot more transparent. So instead of things taking a lot of months to negotiate contracts or negotiate tenders, we have over just under 50 auctions happening in 2020 2021. So it's a lot of activity that is resulting in savings from procurement, increasing the value by looking at the whole energy chain from upstream, midstream, and downstream. And I just stress that part of that value is coming through also better operations, better reliability, asset integrity, less downtime, a lot more, I would say, real-time data that is now being used to make decisions. We're even leveraging our capabilities doing projects in Ghana, doing projects locally here, where our engineering team is actually delivering on projects internationally as well as here, outside of NGC. So that's another area that we're involved in. You see Phoenix Park looking at acquisitions and making acquisitions in the US that is creating value along a NGL or natural gasoline value chain. And I mentioned before, Phoenix Park is one of those subsidiaries that is taking liquids out of your wet gas that are being extracted because the downstream customers don't like those liquids to come into their plants. So the business that Phoenix Park creates is also expanding beyond the local landscape, right? So you see that kind of value being created.
Mr. Lokan, just 1 second, right? Because I want to pinpoint the last question before the chairman moves on to another member. If you've had energy companies throughout the world have had to make substantial cutbacks in terms of their operation, staff resizing, downsizing, realignment, in some instances, massive salary adjustments and cuts in order to keep your value chain going. Have NGC had the cause to do any of that in line with what other energy companies throughout the world have had to do? And if not, what specific rationale would be attributed to not having to go that line in terms of your operations at NGC?
Well, of course, I have to be careful how I answer that question in public. But what I would say, look, when it comes to looking at the efficiency of the business, if you look at the way how the amount of people that are required to run the business, that has been reduced by about 25% between 2016 to 2020, right? And that has been a result of managing the classifications of contract workers, temporary workers, various people along the chain. I think we've gone past that stage now where we are looking at the skills that are required for the future and introducing technology in a matter that makes the processes a lot easier. But as I sit here as president of NGC, there's no sacred cow, as we know, that is present at this point in time, and all options we would look at, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lucan.
I'll now call on Amrita Dionarine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for all the clear answers that we have been receiving so far. Mr. Lokan, now I understand that what you're saying is that so far for NGC, the most profitable areas are in the downstream sector, while the least profitable seems to be with respect to electricity. And I saw in your submission, you would have drew reference to steel as well. But what I also saw in your submission is that you indicated that the largest risk is in relation to the take-or-pay arrangement liabilities that could be incurred in the future. So could you elaborate a little bit more on this? Is this entirely related to TNTech only, or is it that the signing of these contracts in general could result in some sort of challenges or significant risk for NGC?
No, I think that's one of the areas we have been managing, I would say, quite well. There are different obligations that we have with different people that we buy from and people that we sell to. And clearly, I think we've been managing some of those issues. We are not in a boundary now where we are incurring those kinds of take-or-pay liabilities. We are not doing that. So I think we have managed the situation in a way where we've had to alter some of the contractual quantities of gas that we have had to sell some of the plants in a time when not all the molecules were present. You would see curtailments have been decreased over the years, over time, and you would see the management of the business has taken a much more focused commercial purpose. So with respect to the question on that risk, I think the bigger risk now is the cash flow management and working capital that we talked about before.
Right. So, okay. So, but before I elaborate on the cash flow situation, I had one other question that I wanted to ask. So, have you all experienced any loss in sales or fees from customers that you all would have lost over the past 5 years?
Well, the answer to that is yes, because surely we would not have had sales to some of the companies that would have made decisions, as we talked about when COVID came along. There were decisions with one of the Nutrien plants, one of the Methanex plants, which is the Titan plant. We know that. And then we also know that the smallest Yara plant closed in 2019, which was a fairly small, inefficient plant in the broad scheme of things.
Okay. So going on to the whole cash flow issue, and I noted in one of your responses, you would have indicated that the loss is not entirely local in nature. So, and I would have gone through the consolidated financial statements and the audited financial reports. And up until December 2019, an indication would have been made, an assessment saying that the foreign currency risk is immaterial at that point in time. Would you say that that situation still holds?
I'll ask Naranjit to give a more qualified response on that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question. So in terms of foreign exchange risk, as a company, the NGC Group, our business is basically a US dollar business. All right. In fact, our functional currency in which we transact all our business is US dollars. We earn US dollars. We pay our gas suppliers in US dollars. We do have to convert a small amount of US on a monthly basis to cover expenses. So any potential depreciation of the currency translates into a positive way for NGC. Yeah.
Okay. With respect to the credit rating, right now, I saw in your submission you all have Moody's and Standard & Poor's ratings for 2008. Now, I haven't seen a rating since then, and I know the situation with respect to the gas prices, the energy sector, which is exacerbated by COVID. The situation is, as you all have said, is becoming worse. And I know CARICRIS has made a rating earlier on this year. How do you all see this rating improving going forward? Or could you comment on that?
Okay, Naranjit here again. So I will comment and then maybe Mark can add. I mean, the rating at the end of the day, it's a function of what's going on in the business and solving the business problems. Our rating, that we received from Moody's in 2020, we are BA1 negative with Moody, which is just under investment grade, and BBB minus, which is investment grade with Standard & Poor's. We continue to focus on the key business drivers that impacts the business, and those are the basic things that will impact how we address the issues around credit ratings. And hence we remain focused, on the business and dealing with, some of the challenges that we face right now with TNTech as a major, customer of NGC. In fact, that's one of the areas that the rating agency focus on a lot on an annual basis during their rating review.
Okay. Now I have a question that probably the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and the Ministry of Finance could possibly NGC as well. Now, I know these three entities would contribute a lot to the annual forecasts of revenues of the country. That will go into budgeting and so on. Could you all enlighten us on how this process takes place? How you all collaborate to ensure something like that, ensure that the efficient forecasting of energy revenues is done by the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with the Ministry of Energy and NGC?
I'll take the question. Yes, hi. I will take the question because the Ministry of Energy is at the center of that that aspect of it with respect to energy revenues in conjunction. Ultimately, Ministry of Finance will come up with the final forecast in terms of the actual revenues, but we contribute quite a lot in terms of that. So because of our governance of the energy sector, what we will do is based on the operations and the reports from each of the companies, we request data from both the upstream, that is the natural gas and crude oil producers. And so we will look at what they have been doing in terms of the actual performance. And we will also get projections from them, combine that with the information that we have in terms of their capital expenditure for the future, their plans and their projections. And what we will do is to collate all of that to come up with what we think would be the revenues back to the Ministry of Energy and to the government from the energy sector. We also collate information, and NGC is a very important aspect of that in terms of being the aggregator, in terms of what will happen in the midstream, which is where NGC is, and also from the downstream, which is the petrochemical and the LNG sector. We have two groups in here. So we have the royalties that we would look at, and so we would project what are the royalties. But we also contribute towards sending information for the forecast to the Board of Indian Revenue and to the Budgets Division. And we go through that exercise a minimum of maybe, I would say, 4 times per year, at least once per quarter, in terms of ensuring that we have the information sent ahead of the budget, and then as the actual prices and production coming throughout the year, we will adjust that so to reflect the current realities. All right, so that's how the process is done. So it's a very interactive process between ourselves and different departments within Ministry of Finance, namely the Budget Department and also the BIR as well.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I would pause for now.
Okay, Laurel Lizama, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Chairman. Thank you very kindly.
Would you like to ask?
Sure, certainly. Thank you. Good morning again, members, and thank you so much for being here. I'd like to ask NGC about its green agenda. Can I get some insight into that, please? And then I have a couple of questions following up after that, please. And sustainability and the green agenda.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because it's so apt in what we're talking about in NGC now. Yes. And that's because if you look at the world of, I'm getting some feedback. If you look at the whole world of energy now, you can see that there is a growth in population and growth in energy demand. That's clear. But what you see changing is, even though the demand in energy is growing, you see that the energy mix is changing very deliberately. And that's because if you look at the climate change issues now, we fall in the Latin America and Caribbean region. And even though we are roughly 10% emitters in the whole global scheme of things, with the big emitters being China and the US, you can see that the split between the contributors of the greenhouse gas emissions is between what we call carbon dioxide, CO2, and methane. And methane is the largest culprit. If you look at what natural gas is 90-something% methane, right? So if you look at the green agenda for the company, it's really to make a difference, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, but for the region, because it's the region that is seeing the dramatic effects, even though so this is what you call a skewed impact, where you're not emitting, the majority of emissions. But as small island nations in the Caribbean, you're seeing the tremendous effects of hurricanes and floods and food security being impacted in the Caribbean region. The green agenda for NGC, we have always been involved in some aspect or the other. For example, we are in LNG. LNG is used to provide a fuel that is used for displacing coal or oil and so on. And in the current energy mix, that is impacting countries like China, far away on the other side of the globe. But it is also impacting the Caribbean region, which is essentially using fuel oil and oil-related products for their electricity. We sit here in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore LNG can be a cleaner transition fuel. Now, I speak in terms of the green agenda in that if you look at where the fuels are going, oil is already decreasing worldwide. Coal is already decreasing worldwide. Some may argue differently. There's plus or minuses depending on who you speak to. And it all depends on how fast you could invest in the area of renewables and other areas like that. And it all depends on the amount of investments that are required. But you do need to change the energy mix of Trinidad and Tobago. If you look at Trinidad and Tobago right now, our electricity, all of it is coming from gas. And look at the problems that is creating. We could have taken that gas and better utilize it for, say, our petrochemical sector, while our electricity comes from renewables. So you will see the Ministry of Energy embarking on initiatives with the National Energy and so on, and BP and Shell, and making announcements on renewables. We are also in CNG. Some question CNG, but if you look at CNG model, that was really for replacing the gasoline and diesel used in existing fleets with a cleaner fuel. Right, so I talked about LNG, I talked about renewables, which is coming soon. I talked about CNG, and if you even look at the energy efficiency side of the business, where the best savings we could use on fuel usage is energy efficiency. You see the National Gas Company and the National Energy involved in the cabinet-appointed committee on energy efficiency and conservation, and that feeds from policy, frameworks, education, appliances, standards, etc. So our green agenda is really a compulsory one, where you have to affect the demand for energy, be a major player in that game, but you can also affect the energy mix that people are using, whether it's in China or the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, we are also providing engineering services to provide some countries with some possible solutions for changing the energy mix, right? This has to work in tandem, of course, with the Ministry of Energy Caribbean energy policy. But I think from a whole host of issues, and I should get back to methane, by the way, and methane is the big culprit here, where the NGC has become part of the global methane partnerships, and we are also impacting the standards and reporting. So our focus is on venting, flaring, and is not only for leaks from safety point of view, but it's also for the environmental point of view. The methane is 80 times worse than the normal carbon dioxide in a 20-year period. And therefore, what you see, the operations people doing at NGC is they're using infrared cameras, they're using drones, they're doing different things. We are now getting into satellite technology, which is also going to be able to measure methane and leaks, not only for NGC, but across Trinidad and Tobago. So I think we can make a positive impact in the whole green agenda, as well as information for everybody in this space.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So NGC is basically evolving as needed as pertains to the green agenda. Thank you. Two things coming out of that I want to ask you, please. One, you talked about the use of new technology, etc. I noted that in your report previously submitted, you were using technology to drive value improvement and cost as part of your cost management initiatives. Could you just expatiate very briefly on that, please?
Yes, I mean, I gave an example such as the procurement, right? And procurement where we are using SAP Ariba. And before, what used to happen is that we would do projects, but the projects would not be specified in a manner where you can clearly get the savings with e-auctions. So for e-auctions, everybody goes in a room and they see what they have to provide. The spec is clear. And then you're bidding against each other in this room, and you're coming out with the best result. So the e-auctions actually started in May 2019. And to date, I think we've saved 16 million in the first year, and another 20, at least a 20 in the 2020, subject to Naranjit's correction. But it has more than paid off for the tool already. That's SAP Ariba. And what that has done is not only save money, it has changed the way we work. We are now working a lot closer between the projects team who is demanding the services and materials, but working closely between that group and the supply chain management, specifying earlier so that by next year, 2021, there's already the procurement plan. And you can start e-auctioning from the beginning of the year and not waiting 9 months out of the year to specify what you need and gain the savings in the last 3 months of the budget year. So you find it's changing our business completely, and it's also driving the whole work of cost savings, as you mentioned, cost effectiveness.
Thank you. I'm very happy to hear that. And this leads me to my final question so far. Chairman, if you don't mind, please. In reference to your last strategic plan, which I believe was 2016 to 2020, I suspect that there may have been some of your goals that you would have identified that you didn't achieve. And could you tell me how you plan to move forward with some of the things that you may have not achieved? And then I know one of your goals included strengthening your national contribution. So 2 questions I want to ask you coming out of that. What does this mean for the country's future insofar as energy, insofar as your national contribution is concerned? And I want to ask you, what are some of your corporate social investment activities that you plan to undertake in the coming years, given prevailing circumstances? Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, one of the fundamental pillars that we have built on, I talked about securing gas contracts, securing a business. I talked about developing our organization, more, safety, reliability, cost effectiveness. There's a third one, which is growing locally and globally at the same time. And the fourth pillar is really what you're speaking of here, which is the national contribution. If you would have looked at our sustainability reports, I think this is our fourth one that's coming out. We started for 2017, 18, 19, and the 2020 is coming out around the middle of this year. So as far as I'm aware, there isn't the global companies like BP and Shell, they do sustainability reports as well. I'm not aware that they do any sustainability reports locally in Trinidad, but if you look at the state entity here, NGC is producing a sustainability report that is showing how we're running the business. So you would see safety statistics there. You would see the way how we're managing the projects. You would see the skill building going on with people, going on in the organization and the skill being built. And you would see the value creation that we have been talking about as well, where we have done several activities, not only using e-auctions, but also doing many other activities from contract negotiations and many other activities that we identify value. In the case of CSR in particular, there would have been budgets of over 200 million. This was prior to 2016. We are managing in a 1/10 of that framework, but basically the thinking is different. The thinking is no longer just about sponsorship. The thinking is about sustainability. So an example of that is if you take 3 steel bands that we sponsor and they would have gone panorama, the thinking now is that we would give them skills. They are part of an MIC program, which is 3 years long, where they learn welding, manufacturing, music technology. We would score their music and so on as well, so that doesn't get lost. So you would see that the whole sustainability thinking, we would involve the university. They would get credits for scoring the music and things like that. So it's taking on a different realm. We would have sponsored the Police Youth Club as well as the YTEP and so on, but they are now linked together. Whereas before they weren't. And now what you're seeing as part of the whole sustainability thinking, you're getting the youths that would have dropped off the Police Youth Club now getting into the YTEP programs, and that becomes a sustainable link. So that's the kind of thinking that's going on. We're already in the big areas like Bocas Lit and literacy across the country, and of course sport, the NAAA and so on. So, but the thinking is very much sustainability. How are we building? Maybe before it was about measuring what you're doing by contributions and all these other things. But I think where we are thinking now is what impact are we making, and who's benefiting, and how does the individual and communities actually benefit from that? So I think that there's a thinking shift or mindset change that is built into our sustainability reports.
Thank you so very much. I am really, really delighted to hear that response. And I think that that this approach that you've adopted could probably potentially be used as a best practice for other enterprises in Trinidad. And I'm particularly happy that you're talking about sustainability and involvement for the young people and longevity and long-term things. And I do hope that we'll not have another happiness campaign. I really like the direction you're going. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's it for me so far. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Lukwan, we have 2 questions from the public. And
Mr. Chairman, just in case you may have forgotten me, I do look forward to your attention so that I too can direct my questions to the panel before us.
Okay, you go ahead. Would you like to intervene at this time?
Yes. I know you're a very observant man, but I fear that you might have forgotten me.
Proceed, sir.
And may I thank you very warmly, Mr. Chairman. May I thank you. As I listened to Mr. Lokwan a moment ago, he did not mention that only last week I joined his colleagues, including the NGC chairman, at the military-led academic training facility out in Mount Seeker, where they, Phoenix Park Gas Processors, sponsored and developed a dining hall, a very sustainable and well-developed dining hall for the MILAT cadets. And for the public to understand, these are the young men who have come into this military-led program to carry on with their academic development, taking them out of the community into that. So I want to congratulate them for that. Let me direct this to the chairman of NGC, Mr. Chairman, if you would be kind enough to permit me. Mr. Enel, would it be correct, and this way we'd give Mr. Lokwan a little break because he's been on the trot since we started this morning. Yes. Mr. Chairman, would it be correct for me to understand what I have heard this morning to be Trinidad and Tobago, a little island south of the Caribbean, next 15% gas and oil repository that is Venezuela, got involved in the 1990s in the business of gas when previously we flared it. It was burnt and went into the atmosphere. And Mr. Parian told us a moment ago that between 2015 and 2020, the company has done remarkably well. And I am very, very happy to hear that. Would it be correct for me to say, Mr. Chairman, that that record, as described by Mr. Pariag a while ago, was as a result of your renegotiating those contracts that Mr. Lokwan spoke about, some of which may have been palpably unfavorable to Trinidad and Tobago in the sense that the upstreamers, those who were exploring and extracting this finite resource from the earth, as Mr. Lokwan says, they were doing so, and we were not getting, at that time, commensurate returns for the loss of this natural resource. But the renegotiation of the contracts contributed to the outstanding performance that Mr. Pariag spoke about a while ago, in the sense that those renegotiated contracts brought more monies, more returns to Trinidad and Tobago through the NGC, and more than that, royalties, something that we had not seen. These are payments by these upstream explorers, extractors, we hadn't seen for a long time. Would that be correct, Mr. Chairman?
So thank you, member. Let me respond to you by indicating something that you have information on, but we have not expressed, and it's this. If I were to have you look at your documents, you would see that the operating company cost structure, and it's important that we understand this, is as follows. Of the 100% cost associated with the national gas company, gas purchases represent 88%. Employee costs, 3%. Depreciation, 3%. Interest costs, 2%. Maintenance, 1%. And others, 3%. I say that because it is important that we understand that the structure of the NGC does not fit the normal structure of another commercial type entity. That's the first issue. It means, therefore, that where we can get the best benefit is how we negotiate the gas purchase arrangements. The gas purchase arrangement starts with the government's policy on how it is going to incentivize the upstreamers and how it shares in those costs to produce that gas so that the national gas company can make it available to the petrochemical sector, and that the petrochemical sector can make a profit that goes to the consolidated fund that allows us to run the country to pay for goods and services. That construct requires all agencies, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Energy, the NGC in particular, the Parliament, to understand what is taking place at the particular point in time. And you are correct, because at different points in time, depending on what is happening in the global energy sector, the country has to respond in a particular way. What may be appropriate in a high price environment is not going to be appropriate in a low price environment. The NGC was able to do a number of things to stabilize the petrochemical sector. Yes, it was also able to go back and negotiate with the upstreamers, those who produce, to produce so that we can get product available to the Trinidad and Tobago citizen so that it could convert to revenue streams. You are absolutely correct. The NGC has had to do quite a number of things. We have done quite a number of things. Now is not the appropriate time to discuss it, but this is what I need to say to you. On the basis of what we have seen in 2020, and on the basis of what we have seen in 2021, we believe that in the very short term, the NGC will continue to get back to its former state, where it will contribute positively to the Trinidad and Tobago revenue as we see it. And what we are asking at this point in time is that simply all the players just hold on for a little bit longer as we go through this intervening period, which has been gotten a little bit worse as a result of COVID, and a number of other things taking place, the introduction of shale gas into the United States, the change in the structure. suffice it to say, member, that the NGC has a plan. We've looked at these matters, and I think that we are at the stage now where we can explain how we propose to create the sustainability that the president has talked about with some of the things that we are doing and some of the strategies that we are putting in place. One other issue that arises is that we may need the support of the government insofar as looking at some legislation is concerned to help with the process, and I'm very sure that Minister Khan and others will be looking at that. The other thing that we are looking at, just to close my point, is an examination of what is taking place at every segment of the gas business. And we are trying to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago get the best possible benefit on what has been invested. And in order to do that, we are learning the business and we are making investments in the business for the long term. Because as we look at our gas supply issue, we believe that in 12 to 24 months, we are going to be at a stage where the revenue streams as we knew them before will be improved significantly. That's what Mr. The member is taking place right now in our shop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next question. Thank you very much. We would have heard let me go now to Mr. Pariag. We would have heard a loss that the company suffered a 300+ million loss for the first time. I think the chairman correctly alluded to that. To the ordinary citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, that might sound very alarming, alarmist even. But am I correct to think, would the ordinary citizen in the country be correct to think that for the most part over the past few years when we were doing particularly well, our gas was sold 25% of the consumption on the eastern seaboard of the United States purchased our gas. And today with, as you say, shale, where they are producing their own gas, the demand for what we sold to them has fallen. In addition to that, gas consumption internationally over the last year as a result of COVID, gas and energy consumption would have taken a serious nosedive heading south. And of course, we would have heard from Mr. Loquan a while ago that there are now more players. When we began in 1995 and thereabout, getting involved in gas, there were fewer players in the market. Today we have many more players, and this is why the thing has become so much more competitive, and we now find ourselves moving from concentration in the United States, looking now to Asia, looking at now to what we call Latin America. Would that be a correct position? Generally, in terms of the performance of the NGC?
Remember, generally what has happened, and we have said this before, is that the United States, as you have correctly identified, no longer buys our product because they have, and as a result of that, a couple other things have occurred. The cheapness, if you will, of the shale product has created new businesses in other areas within the Latin America space that we had opportunities before. What that means is that we now have to go to areas like China and Far East, which creates for us an issue with pricing and with the margin that we can get as a result of that price, which reduces our revenue substantially. What we have tried to do in those instances is that we've tried to do two things. We've tried, first of all, to get involved in ownership of assets so that it is no longer a case of simply being in the business. We are owning assets now. We are partnering with others to learn how these assets are performing. And we are, in fact, creating new value for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We are creating value as owners because we now understand the business. We are creating value as aggregators. We know what is happening on the upstream, so we can negotiate better. We know what is taking place on the downstream because we have a sense as to what is taking place. And we are trying as far as possible to make sure that the energy industry, as we have known it, continues to stay competitive. In many instances, the NGC has also absorbed costs that rightfully belong to the marketplace. But we did this on the understanding that in the longer term, it serves us absolutely no way to cause the industry to be in any way better than 100%, and that's what we're doing. Insofar as the business is concerned, we see ourselves as integrated throughout the gas business, integrated. Before, we were simply an aggregator. That is no longer the case. We are now able to compete globally with the best in class. And I want to make this particular point because I think Trinidad and Tobago needs to understand that the men and women who are part of the NGC group have done some very important work during the COVID period. In fact, I think that the COVID period tested the organization's ability to respond in a crisis. And it is to the credit of the organization that during that particular period, all our systems, our electricity and everything else worked. There's one other point I want to make about the loss that has been discussed. There are issues that are under the management's control and there are issues that are not under the management's control. The issue of subsidizing the cost of gas to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the issue of non-payment by TNTEC is not under management's control. If you were to take out those items that were not under the direct control of the management, NGC in 2020 would have made a profit. Because there are issues that is outside of the control that the organization must deal with and is dealing with. Some of these are court issues on the basis of past claims and impairments that occurred within the normal course of the business. So the fear that the organization is somehow or the other not doing well is not true. The fact of the matter is that the organization is doing well, but there are some issues that the organization has inherited that it could have facilitated when the price was higher. And as a result of the reduction in price, we are seeing a different result. And I think that we just need to put that on the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My quick penultimate question, and I direct this to Mr. Loquan. Nutrien, a downstreamer, comes out of business. Yara, a downstreamer, using some of the gas originally, came out of business. And you hear alarm in the national community, all the companies closing down and so on. And it's NGC fault, it's the government fault. I would like to ask Mr. Loquan, speaking to this committee this morning, do you consider those developments to be a blot, an indictment against NGC? And if not, why not?
I think as I tried to explain in some of the cases earlier, like the Yara plant, for instance, which came out in 2019, that was in comparison to many plants in the local landscape as well as the international landscape. That has one of the smallest production and highly inefficient plant. In other words, it took a lot of energy compared to another plant to make 1 ton of ammonia. And therefore, in the case of Yara, that is once you have an environment where it's sort of the most competitive of the plants to survive in a global environment, one of the first things that you see coming out, not only in Trinidad, but you see it also in other parts of the world, as has happened before, you would see the smallest inefficient plants coming out. That is not a blot against NGC. The landscape has changed. There's no question about it, right? And in the case of Nutrien and Titan, those are not plants that have said they're going out of business, they're shutting down those plants forever. That is not the case. Those are cases where they have made announcement as a result of the significant cutback in industrial demand that has affected not only Methanex and Nutrien, but many other companies worldwide, where plants have either been idled or maintenance have been taken, and so on and so on. So it is not, this is a reality of what we're going through with the economy affected by COVID. And as I said before, prior to COVID, there was also the lower cycles coming in with some of those plants already. So COVID exacerbated those issues with the demand closing off. And as the chairman would have said, in 12 to 24 months, once the economies recover, because methanol, for example, is linked very heavily to oil, is linked to economies recovering, because that's when the use of those products taking methanol would come back. So I think we have to kind of stay tuned to this space, and as the chairman said, we have to stay with firm stomachs during this time, because the recovery, you have to wait until the markets recover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And my last question, as you would permit me, like everyone else, Mr. Pariag told us, Mr. Chairman, that the company was, of course, doing well. Our cash balances at 2015 was about 5 point something billion dollars, and today it's about $6 billion. And basically, we have done reasonably well in all of the circumstances that we have heard this morning. NGC has acquitted itself with some class in this business. But just before that, you see, just before 2015, NGC, I am advised, hosted cash balances of some $16 billion, Mr. Lokwan. What did you do with that money? Why are you without it today? Why are you struggling to keep your books balanced from 2015 to now, when just before that, a year or two and a year and a half before that, you hosted $16 billion? What is your reaction to that on behalf of your NGC, Mr. Lokwan?
Well, I wish we had it, because that would have certainly fit well with the growth agenda that we have in mind, because this business requires investments for continuity and growth. So if you want, one example of that is Block 3A. Block 2C is falling off in decline, while Block 3 is the same operator that is using 2C infrastructure, and you need to invest to keep it going. So that is some of the things that we need to have in mind. So the 16 billion, that was not, certainly I came in September 2016, so I beg to say, well, this is certainly not present at the time, and the what you see in the retained earnings is really as a result of.
But Mr. Lokwan, I cannot accept that, because while you were not there, NGC has records. I am told that all of that you said to this chairman of this committee this morning and to us members, I am told that NGC, prior to 2015, your company, Mr. Lokwan, got itself involved in things outside of oil and gas and the things you spoke about this morning. For example, building a water treatment facility in my constituency. Is it the case that NGC still gets outside of its core, building road, building water works and all of that? What is the state of affairs now? We want to know, Mr. Lokwan.
Well, we're certainly sticking to our core business, and I laid it out before. That is really in the gas value chain. So we would be involved in investments in the upstream sector with partners there with gas. In the midstream, we would be in LNG and aggregation, and in downstream, we would be in methanol And of course, you have all the subsidiaries that I mentioned earlier on. We are not in the water business. So in the case of the BTOM issue, we are in arbitration, as you may be aware, because monies would have been spent for 37% was really found on the ground, and 75% of the money was spent out of a contract, and therefore there's arbitration to recover sums, and that is where we are in those kinds of areas.
So this committee could be assured in closing.
Thank you very much.
In closing, Mr. Chairman, in closing, this committee, Mr. Lokwan, could be assured that your sins and blemishes prior to 2015 will be committed no more.
Well, this is not a political meeting. So
No, Mr. Chairman, I asked the member a question.
Mr. Lokwan doesn't have to answer.
No, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have put a question to Mr. Lokwan. Would you be kind enough to let him answer me, please?
But that's a political question. He's not a politician.
Mr. Lokwan, would you provide us with an answer, please? Can we be assured that that kind of policy approach will be no more?
Well, I maintained my statement before, where we are very focused as a business. I've described what that business was across a gas value chain. We are not in any non-core type of business. We don't intend to be. And if you look at the future, you would see us getting more and more involved, not only across the gas value chain, but you would see us also involved in the green space, because the green space would also require investments in renewables and those kinds of areas. And that is where our business lies. If you look at some of the legacy type projects, what I call legacy, in other words, they went on for many, many years, because of the formation of the projects group now, and the stage gates that we follow in our project methodology, we can say that the projects that we do go through a much more rigid methodology, where you define your project very well up front, you decide what it does for your business, and you justify it through a board process. That is how we work. So the project methodology, as I described, went on from finding legacy projects. Some of those legacy projects have been closed off or almost closed off now over a period of time, due to the fact that we have managed those projects very effectively. And any new project that is coming into the business has to be justified through the stage gate methodology, and it has to be justified right up to the board. And that is how we work. So I can give my assurance, as long as I'm leading the NGC, that the projects that we are doing falls in line with that methodology and falls in line with our business, which is the entire gas value chain.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lokwan.
Thank you very much.
Clear. I want to make it as chairman. As chairman, let me make it very clear. This is a meeting that is dealing with the financial audited accounts of this company. This is not a political meeting. So we don't want to put our officials in a position where they can feel uncomfortable. So, Mr. Lokwan, I just want to ask you two questions that have come from the public that they would like to have some answers on. One, NGC, it was noted, this is a question, NGC noted that it has a financial instrument in place to deal with 50% of its major outstanding debt. The member of the public is asking, how will the company utilize the remaining 50%? That's the first question coming from the public. The second question coming from the public is this: given the current challenges facing NGC, has the company done a review of its operations to return to profitability? So, Mr. Lokwan, you can either decide who in your team can answer this question, or whether you are in a position to do so on behalf of the members of the public.
Well, for the first part, which is the debt instrument, I would ask my VP Finance to respond.
Thanks very much, Mark. Okay, yes. So with respect to the bond to mature in 2036, as I said before, we have an instrument that will cater for 200 million US of that remaining liability. And the plan, and this instrument matures basically in 15 years from now. The plan will be to put in place another instrument that will take care of the remaining balance of that liability. Certainly that is going to be addressed, not in 2021 or 2022, but somewhere, between, 23, 24. Accordingly. But the plan is to put in place another instrument to meet that liability when it falls due.
And the second question, Mr. Lukwan?
Second question I gather was, have we
Given
reviewed
the current challenges facing NGC, has the company done a review of its operations to return to profitability?
Yes, I think we have been doing that. And if you look at our, strategy evolution for NGC, it is moving the company away from simply buying and selling gas when the margins are thin. And basically, as the chairman would have alluded to, going towards a strategy of getting value across an entire gas value chain. So that would mean that we have reviewed and are continuing to review the operations along the upstream element, the midstream element, the downstream element, the LNG marketing and trading, and the way how we conduct our operations, from procurement to projects, to the way how we manage the networks, to real-time data using technology, and so on. We have been reviewing that with particular strategies in place so that we can secure the business for the future, which is always number one, where we know we have contracts that are coming to an end, and therefore a large part of the business is always looking at the contractual landscape and what we do going forward, as well as building the organization to a much sounder institution, safety-wise, people-wise, governance-wise, projects-wise, and creating value, which we are measuring. And not only that, we're using technology. The tool is called Power BI. And the Power BI is actually, I guess you may have seen it, but it is actually taking all the measurements that we have in the various divisions across the company and making it visible for the people on the teams and so on. And we can see exactly where we are in various points in time for those areas, from safety, finance, HR, projects, governance, etc., etc. So that is already in the technology loop, and the board is also seeing that.
Okay. May I seek some clarification on a statement that you made earlier, Mr. Lukwan, about projects that you have via NGC in Ghana? Can you explain to this committee or provide some information as to what are these projects and whether these projects are generating revenues to the NGC at this time? So you have projects in Ghana, if I heard you correctly. What are these projects, and are these projects generating revenues to NGC, or is it generating or are they rather generating losses?
No, in fact, I would say we're starting small. But when I said we are leveraging our engineering services, this had to do with a small regulated skid, which in the broad scheme of things for Ghana was important to its power supply. And they needed that for better regulation to a power station. And that project has been, after some time, it has been subcontracted by the Ghana Gas Company to a company. They contracted us to do the job, for which we are being paid at each different milestones of the project, from engineering and design to procurement, etc. And that revenue is actually starting to be received, right? So it's small projects like that leads to, I would say, the bigger doorways of going into that space. But that is building our reputation of delivering a project that is professional by our projects group. Commendations to them. And they are also in a virtual world using 3D, using technology where they can see the design of the project with somebody else on the other side of the world in Ghana. And they are going through the design and different things like that. So I think that has been delivered.
Could you indicate,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hines,
Mr. Chairman?
allow me, I'm continuing. Mr. Lukwan, can you advise this committee what is the value of this project and how much we have gotten back in return thus far?
So the answer is 1.3 million US dollars, which is roughly 9 million TT dollars.
Right. May I also ask, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lukwan, I am going to the submission that you have made to this committee on page 44, dealing with staff costs. You said a short while ago that in your attempt to bring about greater levels of efficiency, you have had to reduce your headcount by 25%, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at a table in this appendix on page 44, which shows that at the end of 2016, the total number of staff members, inclusive of temporary, contract, and permanent, total 832 at a value of $305 million. However, when we look at the comparable table or the comparative table, 2020, the staff has been reduced from 832 to 647, minus temporary, 50 contract, and 597 permanent. But the value remained roughly at $304 million. So even though the headcount has been reduced, the value of your wages and salaries remain at about $304 million. Could you clarify for this committee this conundrum?
Yeah, I would have to get some guidance here to review that some more, but I know there was a wage freeze at the very early stages. So despite some wage freeze in the early years, going forward in time, that would have been, some of that would have been corrected, but I would need to check those figures with my HR. If not before the meeting, then within very short order.
Okay, I will appreciate that, and if it could be submitted in writing as well. Mr. Lukwan, the question of dividends, could you advise this committee between the period 2015 to 2016 and 2015, 2016 to 2019, 2020, can you inform this committee what was the annual dividends paid out to the state or to the government of the Republic of TNT on a yearly basis? So in 2015, 2016, what was the value or the quantum of dividends paid out to the government of Trinidad and Tobago? And we want it for 2016, 2017. 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. So we'll have an understanding of the successful enterprise that we have operated in the interest of the national community that is contributing to the national coffers. Can we have those figures?
Yeah, I would ask Naranjit as VP Finance to answer if you can.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. So for the years, the information I have here, it's based on the calendar year, and not government fiscal year. But total dividend payment from 2015, to 2020 is in the order of $11.02 billion. And I will give you the breakout on an annual basis. 2015 was 6.8 billion, 2016, 1.4 billion, 2017, 1.4 billion, 2018, 1.05 billion, 2019, 193 million, and 2020, 109 million. So that's the total sum and the breakout on an annual basis.
Mr. Barria, could you tell this committee whether any further monies were accessed by the particular entity, that is the National Gas Company, in terms of dividends? Did the government of Trinidad and Tobago call upon the National Gas Company to pay any additional dividends outside of what you have outlined to this committee between the period 2015-16 to 20?
So what I've outlined, Mr. Chairman, represents the total dividend payment from 2016 to 2020. There were three in the years 2015, 2017, and 2018. There were some exceptional dividends, and I would just articulate in 2015. The company had an IPO where we sold off interest in one of our subsidiary companies, and we did make a special dividend payment to the state, which would have been incorporated as part of that overall 6.8 billion that I spoke about for 2015. In 2017, there was an additional public offering, and upon successful completion, we did make a special dividend payment of $838 million to the state. And in 2018, we also did, following the liquidation, and settlement of some of our outstanding monies from the CIB, Pico Investment Bank, which was settled through shares. We did do a dividend in kind to the government of Trinidad and Tobago of $627 million. So there were three specific situations that resulted in special payments.
Yeah. Mr. Lukwan, there are some areas.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hines, you'd like to raise?
Mr. Chairman, would you permit me to ask a question as much as you are entitled to?
I'm not through with my line of questions. So would you permit me to be able to get through my questions as the chairman of this meeting?
Thank you. I look forward to an opportunity to see you.
I will return to you shortly. Mr. Lukwan, may I suggest to you, and I would like to find out from you on behalf of this committee, whether the NGC did in fact get final approval for its strategic plan for the years 2017 to 2020. Mr. Lukwan?
Well, my answer to that is, in terms of getting approval, we would have, back in 2017, would have had annual technical meetings where we would have presented the strategic plans or updated plans, which we would do normally every year, which included several ministries and not only the Ministry of Energy.
No, the reason why I'm asking this question is because we are doing a follow-up this committee had asked the National Gas Company to submit a copy of its 2017-2020 strategic plan no later than August the 31st, 2017. We are still awaiting the submission from the National Gas Company of its strategic plan for 2017-2020. That is why I asked the question whether this plan was approved. Because when NGC was before us at the material time, they told us they were awaiting official approval from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. That is why I'm asking the question whether this plan was ultimately approved, because this committee never received a copy of that plan. Could you clarify, sir?
Well, the way how we would have worked back in 2017 is we would have had the 2017 to 20 plan, 2018 to 2021 plan. Do you need to see only the 2017 to 20, or do you need to see the other plans too?
We would like to have copies of the 2017 to 2020 plan and any subsequent plans the NGC has gotten formal approval for.
Yeah, I'm not aware of getting formal approval from the ministry, because normally what we would do is present to a board, and we would certainly get the board approval for the strategic plan. For example, last year we would have had the 2020 to 2024 plan, and we presented that to the minister with the board. But in the years prior, sorry, I'm not hearing you.
You proceed.
Yeah, I was saying like last year we would have presented as a board to the Minister of Energy our strategic plan 2020 to 2024. And in the years prior to that, it would have been via this annual technical committee. Perhaps P.S. Bradshaw could comment on that, but certainly we would have had board-approved plans that we would have been working through and submitted.
Okay, Mr. Lukwan, could you supply this committee with the 17 to 20 strategic plan for the NGC, as well as any subsequent plans of that company? And the other area I wanted to bring to your attention is that NGC was requested in recommendation 1.3 of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee to provide it with a detailed schedule of the activities and timelines regarding the implementation of the plan within 3 months of the approval of the plan. Again, that dealt with the strategic plan, and we wanted NGC to provide this committee with a detailed schedule of the activities. That is now passé. The point I would like to make is that we had given NGC some recommendations which they accepted, and they were supposed to provide this committee with several detailed pieces of information on their operations, which we are yet to receive. Because there's another meeting that is about to start shortly, we are trapped, I should say, for time. So I'll ask all members who have outstanding questions, put them in writing, and we shall submit them to the NGC. And we have a number of outstanding questions that we will also submit to the NGC for written responses. We have now exhausted our time at this meeting. Mr. Likwan, we will welcome brief closing remarks. we will also welcome brief closing remarks from the Permanent Secretary and from Mrs. Mohammed from the Investments Division.
Hi, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lukwan, you have the floor.
Okay. So I would just end off by saying thank you, Chair and Committee, for inviting us and posing your questions. We've tried to answer as to the best that we can, but I would like to end off by saying some important things for the future here. One is we are moving to a business framework that is incorporating value along the entire gas value chain. That is one aspect that I would like to remain with, meaning upstream, midstream, downstream, trading, and any other of the areas of the associated subsidiaries. Secondly, we are focused on sustainability thinking now, which is evidenced by our sustainability report. Our fourth one should come out by the middle of this year for 2020. That describes some of the things that we've been talking about for the morning, which is really explaining all the various aspects that we're working in, all the dimensions. And then thirdly, the question on the green agenda is very important, because I think the whole area of not only expanding energy, but expanding with a clean energy mix and framework is an issue that is facing all companies in the energy sector. NGC will be no different in that space. The only difference is we are across the chain and we can make an immense contribution to Trinidad and Tobago and to the region with our capabilities and our focus on the green agenda. We continue to remain focused on value, and value is going to be created through remaining focused on our gas contracts, sustainability of the petchem sector, and as well as the sustainability of the LNG sector. So we will continue to depend on working with the government very closely in solving some of the challenges ahead. Thank you for your time. We're not hearing.
Can I invite the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy to make brief closing remarks?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that I've taken note of some of the questions and the comments that you have had with respect to NGC, and we too will continue to liaise with the company. I just want to make 3 points. One, we at the Ministry of Energy see natural gas as a key fuel in terms of the transition towards being sustainable and in terms of changing the energy agenda, and therefore we still think that natural gas is good business. Two, we see NGC as fulfilling a critical role in terms of where its placement within our natural gas sector locally. And three, that we will continue to work as we have been doing very much in the last few years to ensure that the best decisions are taken with respect to the entire natural gas value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Sharon Mohammed, Ministry of Finance, Investments Division. Brief.
Yes, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and the committee members for having the Ministry as part of this meeting with the NGC. We have taken note of the questions that was asked by the committee, and we will follow up and submit our responses within the agreed time frame. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. At this time, we'd like to thank all the officials from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, also the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, we have with us also the last group. We have with us, I'd like to thank them. That is, well, I think I mentioned gas, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Ministry of Finance Investment Division, and of course, the National Gas Company. So have a very wonderful evening. And Mr. Lukwan, we put you on notice, along with Mr. Enel, the chairman, and all the officials from the Ministry of Energy and Finance. If the committee deems it fit to ask you to return, we shall. So I want to put you on notice. You may be recalled in the event that you are needed by the committee. Have a great evening. We'll now allow the members to leave and other members shall stay. This meeting is now suspended.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.